Ladies, gentlemen, and Spiritborn of all ages, there are a surprisingly large number of ways to make this class unbelievably strong. But something that I love doing is taking builds that have sort of fallen behind a little bit and seeing how we can improve them into being even more competitive with the higher tier options the class has. So today we're having a look at Touch of Death. This skill was originally predicted to be one of the core of Spiritborn's strongest builds, but that was before the fun tech with overpower and banished lords working with Kepaleke was discovered and brought into the bigger, more powerful builds. With the main damage pops of the Touch of Death build technically being from an aspect rather than the skill itself, it actually sort of broke the concept, both because it now needed too much aspect space to actually function without the amulet slot, but also because even if you could, the effect itself just cannot overpower, which made it instantly take a sort of back seat. But what if I told you that while Touch of Death can't beat a tier 150 pit, it can still clear far higher than the predicted peak of around 115, with me doing 120s relatively easily with far from perfect gear as well. So this can absolutely hit much harder and shoot much higher than I am doing here. The main sort of secret sauce here is going back and working in the Unyielding hits aspect. This was used in a lot of early to mid-game Spiritborn builds because of the ability to stack armor that existed, but it fell out of favor very quickly in the deeper endgame because to properly reach the amounts needed to convert your armor into damage at full potency from this aspect without it taking the amulet slot specifically, you would need a greater affix armor percent roll on your amulet, a bunch of bonus flat armor on your gear, and some other bits and pieces too. But if you can get to that point, it then makes it better than not using Unyielding hits by quite a fair margin, which also improves this build from what people expected it to be. If you don't have that gear quite yet, you can swap an aspect around a little bit, and I will tell you how to do that when we get to that section, and you will still do incredibly well with this build regardless. But the result of this as a whole is just an extremely beefy Touch of Death build, giving you some fun with swarms and poison to flavor your Kepaleke brokenness, and one with an extremely high potential limit of power too. Probably still not quite tier 150, but I don't think it'll match the overpower builds, but it's fun, it's another option, and it's more than strong enough to just destroy all of the non-pit content in the game as well. So today let's talk about our Unyielding Touch of Death Spiritborn build. First up then, let's talk about our skill tree. For your first 2 points, stick them anywhere in the basic cluster, as we're not using an actual basic skill, we're using things that technically are basic skills, but not from the basic cluster. This will then unlock the cores, and here we'll be putting 1 rank into the Vigorous passive. You'll note that we have a bunch of extra ranks in passives just because we're using the Shroud of False Death chest piece, so pretty much just count every passive here as having 1 less rank than it does for the purposes of filling out your skill tree. We take this rank of the Vigorous passive because this increases our vigor generation, helping us reach the threshold where we just achieve sort of infinite vigor with the way that the build works. This also lets us put 3 ranks into the Balanced Exertion passive. This increases the damage of core skills, but also increases their resource cost. The increased resource cost doesn't really affect a Kepaleke build properly, but the increased damage, of course, does. Then we move on to the actual focus cluster as well. We'll be picking up vortex as well as its enhancement and also measured vortex. Altogether, this gives us a skill that pulls in nearby enemies and puts them directly on top of you, which helps makes up for a relatively shorter range. This skill also increases the damage of the next skill that you cast afterwards by 20%, and if you have an active barrier, which we always do, it does increase damage and knocks enemies down, which is pretty good for us, adding an extra avenue of consistent crowd control. Then we pick up Ravager as well as its enhancement and also measured Ravager. This, when active, gives you an extra hit on every one of your attacks that counts as a Jaguar skill hit, which is quite important. As well, its duration is extended every time that you get a kill while the skill is active, and it makes your core skills dash to the target, so when you mouse over an enemy while holding out Touch of Death with this active, you will teleport directly to them, which makes it quite fast, and it increases all vigor generation by 30%, which is very, very good for our setup. We also take some passives in this cluster too, 1 rank of Focal Point, mostly just as a gateway to let us put 3 points into Apex for bonus damage to vulnerable enemies, which is doubled against elites and bosses. We take 1 rank of the Mirage passive, mostly again just as a gateway, for 3 ranks of Unrestrained Power. This gives you increased damage while unhindered or unstoppable, and we are pretty much permanently unstoppable because we have very, very high uptime, if not permanent uptime, on Armored Hide. We put 2 ranks into this skill specifically because that's what we've got to play around with, and that gives it a nice equilibrium of duration to actual cooldown reduction. We also get its enhancement, and then we also are going to be taking Reinforced Armored Hide. Altogether, what this does is give you 100% block chance while active, it makes you unstoppable, it gives you some Thorns, which is just a nice bonus, it sets you to your maximum resolve every time you press the button, and while it's active, it also increases your block damage reduction for every nearby enemy as well. This is extremely important. Not only do we use this to just achieve very high defense and increase damage through block chance while it's active, but we also use this to activate Unyielding hits once per 3 seconds, which is our main sort of combo that increases the damage over most Touch of Death builds. Then we'll be picking up Counterattack. This will not go on your skill bar. It is activated passively. We only use the passive part of it. You don't actually need to press any buttons to make this work, because what we want is the actual passive effect of Reinforced Counterattack, increasing your critical strike damage for every close enemy. The way that we actually activate this, even without it being on our skill bar then, is through our unique ring, which gives us the passive effect just naturally. Then we also pick up Scourge as well as its enhancement and Adaptive Scourge. Altogether, what this gives you mostly is a way to fear and slow enemies in a radius around you. As well, any enemy that is being hit by this actively in the poison effect will give you an increased stacking crowd control damage buff up to a total stacked percent of 50% bonus damage to crowd controlled enemies. As well, Adaptive Surge gives you a lucky hit chance to lifesteal up to 35% of your maximum life with every hit, which is extremely powerful. It basically just makes us immortal as long as we don't get one shot. Then we get some passives in here too, mostly just 1 rank of Endurance as a gateway for 3 ranks of Perseverance. This gives us bonus damage reduction per stack of resolve that we have. We stack bonus maximum resolve as one of our stat choices, which lets you have a ton of resolve, which gives you a bunch of damage reduction through this passive. As well, we get a bunch of free stuff that's just really nice thanks to the Shroud of False Death. You get the 10% block chance from this, which turns into more survivability and damage, which is great. You get the extra 20% thorns while you have a barrier, which doesn't really matter for us because we're not built around thorns, but it's still just, a bonus. We get the extra poison resistance and the maximum poison resistance, and we get just increased healing by 20%, which mostly funnels through Adaptable Scourge, and it's still pretty good too. Then we'll be moving on to the Potency Cluster, and this is where things get sort of fun really, because Touch of Death is going to be our main skill. We translate it into being a core skill through the Poised Touch of Death node here, but what this mainly does is it applies poison to enemies, and these poisons have swarms as well. You can only have 3 of these swarms active at a time, so every time you put a 4th swarm out, what it does is pop the previous swarm through a legendary aspect that we'll be talking about in a little bit. What this does is turn the skill into a proper core skill that does a lot of damage in a very short period of time. As well, to make this function, we have a bunch of passives in this circle too, mostly 3 ranks of Vehemence for potency skill increased damage, but also increased cooldown. The increased cooldown doesn't affect us because when Touch of Death is a core skill with Kepaleke, it does not have a cooldown in the first place. We take 3 ranks of the Resilient passive, but we also have a bunch of bonus ranks to this from our gear too, because it's a very, very strong passive. It increases your maximum life for 10 seconds after using a Gorilla skill, so this will be permanently active, and this funnels very well through the Viscous Shield Paragon node, which is quite bugged as we've talked about a lot in the past. We also take 3 ranks of the Potent passive. Again, we want a bunch of bonus ranks of this from our gear wherever you can, so what this does is apply a debuff to an enemy every time that you do damage to them with a Jaguar skill. Ravager counts for this, but so does every other one of our skills because we're using the primary Jaguar Spirit Hall, which gives every skill the Jaguar skill tag. What this does is just increase your damage repeatedly every time you hit them, up to a maximum of 100% with my stacks, but you'll probably be closer to 40% if you don't have bonus passive ranks. Then we take 3 ranks of the Furnace passive, and this increases your critical strike damage for every stack of ferocity you have. We increase our maximum ferocity stacks, we overfill on ferocity, so this has a very large impact on our actual damage. Then we take 3 ranks of Ravenous for just increased damage with centipede skills, which is doubled against healthy enemies. After that, we move on to our ultimate skill cluster here, where we pick up the Hunter as well as both of its enhancements. Altogether, what this basically does is give you an ultimate you can use, which overfills your ferocity by 4, which is very, very powerful. It gives you a 100% bonus increased damage to injured enemies for 8 seconds after you use the ultimate, so this will be pretty permanently active. And if you kill an enemy while the Hunter is active itself, it will have a chance to reset its own cooldown, which it can do multiple times in a row, though the chance does reduce each time that it happens successfully. This is important because it helps us keep some of our passives active in here. One of them is the Resolution passive. This increases your damage to elites after you cast an ultimate skill, and doubles this bonus if you're only fighting one enemy, which mostly just applies to bosses. We take 3 ranks of Spiritual Attunement, which gives you increased maximum vigor. Maximum vigor directly translates to damage in a Rod of Kepaleke build, so this is very powerful. We also take 3 ranks of the Supremacy passive, and what this does is give you a stacking buff every time you get a kill while an ultimate skill is active, up to a 40% maximum with Shroud of False Death included as well. And when the ultimate skill ends, you gain an extra 5 stacks of Supremacy, but then start to lose 1 stack per second. The thing is, with the Hunter and the low cooldown that we have thanks to the Prodigy's Tempo sort of key passive, cycling it frequently, we can keep Supremacy at extremely high stacks, mostly even due to just the last line there. Even on bosses, you get a lot of Supremacy stacks active because of how often we activate the Hunter, therefore how often it ends, and so we get that last line a lot. However, we also put a couple extra points in here. You can technically lose these 2 points and put them somewhere else if you have the Shroud of False Death, but it does make it a little bit more comfortable to get your actual Armored Hide cast once every 3 seconds. What they do is this is just a gateway to a bonus rank in Intricacy. 2 ranks of this, thanks to the one from Shroud of False Death, gives us 2 free casts of the last skill that you've cast before your ultimate after you use it. We use this on Armored Hide, so we cast Armored Hide before we do the Hunter, which gives us then 2 free casts over the next 5 seconds. You can spread these out a little bit to keep your Unyielding hits buff active, and this will last until the next time the Hunter comes off cooldown thanks to Prodigy's Tempo, which lets you activate Armored Hide every 3 seconds extremely consistently in active combat. Then you might have guessed from the past couple of times that I've mentioned it, but for our final skill point, we're going to go with the key passive Prodigy's Tempo. Because of Rod of Kepaleke and the way that we're making this build work, Touch of Death counts as a basic skill, it is a core skill, and it is a potency skill, meaning that it both increases all of our skill ranks every time we cast it 3 times in a row, but also reduces the skill cooldowns of all of our other skills, making us able to use them far more often, which is just a really nice combo, and it's really simple when it all goes through a singular skill. Then we have our Spirit Hall choices for this build, and our primary is, as usual, going to be Jaguar for the extra large pop of damage after every 15 hits. This isn't the fastest hitting Spiritborn build, but the individual numbers are pretty big, and the damage is a bit spiky, so when this proc lines up well, it sort of just explodes your enemies into little bits. Then for your secondary, you basically have a little bit of a choice. If you can reach 100% attack speed bonus from your gear itself while standing in town, and you can do that with good greater affixes and masterworking, then the ideal choice here is the Gorilla secondary Spirit Hall for the bonus resolve stacks, which is quite good for us, and the permanent unstoppable, though we achieve this anyways through Armored Hide. If you have 90 to 95% attack speed while standing still in town, you instead want to go with the Jaguar Spirit Hall for the extra maximum ferocity. This just gives you a little bit closer to reaching the sort of breakpoint of attack speed that we want for this build, but if you are even lower on your attack speed than that, then this won't make the difference, so then again you go back to the Gorilla Spirit Hall, because the 2 maximum resolve stacks will make a lot bigger of a difference, especially because in this situation it means you probably have imperfect gear, which means that you don't have a ton of bonus maximum resolve stacks from your gear, so these maximum resolve stacks are worth more, comparatively speaking. Then we have our gear itself, starting off with our mythic unique for the build, the Shroud of False Death. This is just an incredible item for a hell of a lot of reasons, but an especially good one here is even outside of all the damage and defense that we get from the +1 to all passive ranks, it importantly gives us a rank of Intricacy, which we talked about earlier, gives us a free cast of an ability after using our ultimate, and we use this with Armored Hide as much as possible to let us actually keep the Unyielding hits buff active. It requires a bit more brain power than playing with Unyielding hits does in a build that has just, regular Gorilla skills worked in, but the actual damage result is notably higher in this setup than it would be without Unyielding hits, so it's lovely to see that too. As for upgrading this piece, the actual affix you care about most is maximum life, with all stats also not being bad, but the ideal version of this item for this build is greater affix maximum life with 3 masterworking procs on maximum life, basically. Moving on from that, we have the Rod of Kepaleke weapon. I've explained this dozens of times by this point, but the long and short of it is this unique enables all functionality within the build. The build does not work without it, and even if you somehow could, it would just do way less damage than it does. For greater affix and masterworking proc priority, it is chance to hit twice with core skills above bonus maximum resource, which is also quite good for this. The others are fine, but not anywhere close to as good as those 2. Past that, the unique effect of the roll itself is extremely important. The damage difference between even 2.4% or 2.6% and the maximum 3% roll is extremely large, and pretty much more important than any of the actual affix rolls on the item, so that's important to take into consideration as well. Then after that, we have our unique ring, which is the Midnight Sun. This is completely for the resource generation purpose and management, as the proc from Kepaleke causes us to spend our full resource pool, then this ring at a 50% unique roll effect and 100% of the resource generation stat from various locations means that we get literally 100% of our resource spent back whenever we get a critical hit, enabling just consistent back-to-back Rod of Kepaleke procs. For the ring in this build, cooldown reduction is pretty much the most important stat, but only if your ring is as close to 50% unique effect roll as possible to begin with, as the effect on the ring is the most important part of it by a very large amount. You may be asking, wait, so how does this work then? This whole thing functions around critical hits. Touch of Death is a damage over time effect, and damage over time cannot crit, right? Well, that's where our first legendary aspect comes into this on our amulet, Insatiable. Touch of Death can apply 3 swarms at a time before the first one expires. If you apply a 4th swarm, it cycles them and gets rid of the first swarm that you applied. With the Insatiable aspect, when that happens, it causes a damage pop depending on the remaining damage and duration of the swarm that you got rid of. This pop specifically can not only critically hit, but automatically does so if it is caused by a cast that you do with a Rod of Kepaleke proc. On your amulet, the most important thing that you can get outside of this is greater affix total armor %. This is what makes the unyielding hits aspect actually start to really shine. Without this, you just cannot hit the armor levels required to make it work in endgame. On this, the second most important thing is getting ranks of a useful passive like Potent, which is the one that I have, Apex, which is also good for bonus vulnerable damage, and Unrestrained Power is third priority for just extra damage while you're unstoppable but at a slightly lower rate. For greater affixes on this, again you want total armor percent, that is almost a requirement. Then passive is second priority, as unlikely as that is defined with a greater affix, and then attack speed is great for just increasing our damage in general. For masterworking priority, it is pretty much all in the bonus passive ranks that you have on this, but if you have this amulet without passive ranks, it would instead be on one of the tempers. For your tempering then, mine is totally sort of out of whack for this item, because the ideal options would be Touch of Death Swarm Duration from utility, as well as Maximum Resolve stacks as a defensive option, and that's the one that you would like your masterworking procs in, if not on the passive effect, as this scales both our damage and defense through different parts of our kit. Then we have our ring, which is where we have the unyielding hits aspect, and to put it simply, if you want to use this build but do not have the armor for full conversion from a ring placed unyielding hits aspect to hit maximum rate, just swap the aspects, put the ring aspect here on your amulet, move them back and forth. While it absolutely is a damage loss if you do so, you already do enough damage to deck the majority of the content in the game, including all of Torment 4, which is where you'd be doing the actual farming for better gear to make the swap back. Then once you have enough armor to move this to the ring, you can do so. There's another tip for getting there that we'll go over in a moment as well. On the ring itself, your ideal affixes are lucky hit chance to apply vulnerable to enemies, as this is our main method of applying vulnerable in the first place. You want attack speed and then also maximum life. Greater affix priority is maximum life over attack speed. No greater affix needed on lucky hit chance to apply vulnerable, but it is important as hell to have that as an affix to begin with. For tempers, you want resource generation and basic skill damage ideally, and then for the masterworking procs on your ring, the best ones are attack speed unless you hit 100% attack speed on your stat sheet while standing in town without it, in which case it's better to have them be on maximum life instead. After that, we have our gloves with the bugged but incredibly powerful and difficult to not use redirected force aspect. This gives you critical damage increase converted from your block chance. We go above and beyond 100% block chance by quite a good measure, and this converts even past 100%, so this results in a ridiculous amount of bonus critical damage as a result. The affixes on your gloves should be bonus core skill ranks, attack speed, and maximum life, with greater affix priority being maximum life over core skill ranks, and masterworking priority being maximum life. Tempers should be basic skill damage and then Touch of Death Swarm Duration, which directly transfers to damage as this affects the insatiable aspect pretty specifically. After that, we have our pants for the build with the interdiction aspect. This gives you block chance per resolve stack you have. We stack bonus maximum resolve stacks, and part of that is that it converts to bonus block chance through this, which then converts to bonus critical damage through redirected force. For your pants, you want basic skill ranks as an affix, you want maximum life, and you want bonus flat armor, with greater affix priority being maximum life above flat armor, and basic skill ranks third. For tempering, you want barrier generation and bonus ranks of the resilient passive for bonus maximum life, which both turns into defense and damage as well. As for why we don't take Touch of Death Swarm Duration on this, we have to hit right around 100% barrier generation stat total for our Earthen Bulwark runeword to keep us topped up consistently. So we have to sort of ration our utility temper slots between Swarm Duration and barrier generation to keep a sort of fine balance between them, and this is the best split that works out from what I've seen. For masterworking procs, you want every single one on this piece to be on the Rings of Resilience if possible. Then we have our helmet, and on this we have a bit of a cheat code for the setup, which is the disobedience aspect. This offers you up to 45% bonus armor in active combat, which then helps us reach our required armor for full conversion from unyielding hits. In an ideal world, you'd hit the armor requirement without this, but that requires basically greater affix armor on each of the pieces that I recommend having armor on, or swapping minimum one of our masterworking procs on the amulet over to the total armor percent roll. If you do that, you can switch to the apprehension aspect on this piece for bonus damage against feared enemies, but until you reach that, disobedience lets you make the most out of unyielding hits, which is a really massive damage boost in general and makes it worth this slot if you don't hit the armor without it. On the helmet, then, your ideal affixes are maximum life, flat armor, and Touch of Death ranks, which I don't have here, because maximum resource is a relatively equivalent gain to Touch of Death ranks and is a little bit easier to find as a greater affix. For tempering, you want barrier generation on this piece and maximum resolve stacks. Ideally, all of your masterworking procs on the bonus maximum resolve stacks as well. Our final piece then is our boots, with the duelist aspect to increase maximum ferocity, which both turns into a bonus attack speed and bonus damage, and on these we have bonus maximum life, we have flat armor gain, and we have dexterity, with greater affix priority being armor above maximum life for this, unless you reach armor conversion, maximum without it, in which case maximum life will take priority. The same priority applies to masterworking with this piece too, with maximum life and armor being the important ones depending on what you need, and for tempering you want touch of death, swarm duration, and raw movement speed increase. Moving on from that then, we have our gems and runewords to sort of finish off your gear. For gems you want diamonds in all of your jewelry slots for maximum resistance, just purely resistance gain, though if you are just a few hundred off of the breakpoints for unyielding hits from armor, you can swap one of these out for a skull to lose tankiness, but you will gain damage instead. It's worth noting, no matter how you sort this out, you won't be at full resistance caps, and that's fine, because Spiritborn doesn't need to. We have enough barrier generation and frequent enough invoking of Earthen Bulwark that most of our survivability comes from hitting enemies and triggering this effect, rather than having things like capped out resistances. For your armor gem slots then, you'll want full amethyst for the barrier generation increase that we need, and then for your runewords, we have Pak Q, which in our setup invokes Earthen Bulwark every 3 touch of death casts the way that we use it. We also have Zol, which in our setup increases our maximum life by 20% permanently as long as we keep casting essentially, because it lasts for 6 seconds and triggers every 6 casts of our core skill. This increases our survivability and damage due to the bugged viscous shield Paragon node. On which note, our final sort of bit of setup is the Paragon board itself. The usual quick disclaimer first that this season moving forward, no one is really expected to be at maximum Paragon level, so if you have less Paragon points than I do, you want to make sure that you hit all of the glyphs and the legendary nodes that I do above all else. Most of the other things can be filled in after the fact. If you have more points than me, simply fill out the relevant magic nodes that I have yet to grab near the points that have been already spent, and then use the rest to fill in the stats within glyph radiuses that will increase their actual effect and give us more additive damage bonuses. Aside from that, here's where I'm at right now. On the starting board, you want to head up to the glyph socket itself, and in this first one we have the Colossal glyph. The additive effect does nothing for us really, but the secondary bonus is a multiplicative damage boost per stack of resolve that you have. We stack bonus maximum resolve through our gear, and we get more than enough of that for it to be worth using this glyph even without the additive effect, especially with the good legendary bonus it has too on top of that. After that we move on to the next board, which will be attaching on Viscous Shield. You want to head through the important rare magic nodes over here, which you definitely want to pick up, over to the legendary node itself of the board, which is just extremely bugged. What this is intended to do is to give you bonus damage for every percentage of your maximum life that is a barrier, but it's bugged, it's not calculating correctly, so basically, for every bit of bonus maximum life that you have, and every bit of that is barriered, you get more damage, and more damage, and more damage, to the point that if you have like 12,000 maximum life, and 100% life is barrier, this node will actually give you closer to 1000% bonus damage, even though it's supposed to basically cap out at a 33% increase, which it definitely is more than. After that, we pick up the armor and maximum life for our magic nodes before heading over to the glyph socket itself, inside of which in here we're going to be putting the Bane glyph, which increases your poison for all the strength purchased in the radius. This is very important that you want to try and hit as close to 150% bonus poison damage from this as possible, as this funnels into a later Paragon node that we'll be taking, so we pick up all of the strength in the radius as well as the rare and magic nodes of relevance too. We then head out of the right side of the board, and here we'll be attaching on the Sapping board. You want to go through the important rare and magic nodes up to the legendary node itself, which gives you an effect that increases your damage by 30% every time that you cast 3 of a skill with the same base spirit in a row. Touch of Death obviously is one of the skills that can trigger this, so whenever you cast Touch of Death 3 times in a row, which we do regularly, you will reapply this damage buff, which means that it will be active pretty much permanently. Then you want to head through the rare and magic nodes of relevance over to the glyph socket on the board itself, and inside of this one we have the Hubris glyph. We used to use Revenge here at the very beginning of the season, then we upgraded to Menagerist, but as it turns out, with everything fully upgraded, this gives the largest potential bonus to the nodes that are in the radius, which is the most important because this is where we get bonus maximum resource from our rare and magic nodes here. This increases from being 4 bonus maximum resource on these magic nodes as a base up to plus 17 on each of them, so that's an extra 13 maximum resource per each of these nodes when you have this glyph socketed here, which is very, very big and important. After that, we're going to head back over through the top of the Viscous Shield board, and here we'll attach on the Revealing Paragon board. What we do is go immediately over to the actual legendary node itself, and here what you get is an extra 30% damage to crowd-controlled enemies, as well as a lucky hit chance to knock down any vulnerable enemy, which is quite good for us as an extra way to apply crowd control as well. We then go up this sort of middle tree here to get to the attack speed, rare, and magic nodes, which are quite nice. Then we go back over to the sapping board, and here we'll be attaching on, out of the top side, the convergence board, our final board. We head over to the glyph socket itself first, and inside of this glyph socket we put the Spirit Glyph. This increases your critical strike damage for every bit of dexterity purchased in the radius, and also the additional bonus is a debuff applied to enemies every time you get a critical hit against them, which increases their damage taken. We also take the rare and magic nodes of relevance in here, fill up the actual dexterity required to get the secondary bonus of this effect, then we head over and up through the rare and magic nodes to get to the legendary node of the board itself. This is Convergence, and what this does is give you up to 30% bonus damage as 20% of your two highest bonuses to specific damage types combined. For us, the one that we focus on is Poison, so what this does is take 20% of our poison damage bonus and give us bonus damage in response. This is why we aim for 150% bonus poison damage, because 20% of 150 is 30, which gives us the full 30% bonus from Convergence. After that, we pick up the rare and magic nodes that are important on the board still, including these bonuses to all resistances, which is quite good. Then we head out of the left side of the board to reattach to Revealing and go to the glyph socket itself. In this final glyph socket then, what we have is the Headhunter glyph. This increases the effect of all of the normal nodes within the radius, but more importantly than that, also gives you increased damage to elites as the secondary bonus, and a pretty nice just general damage increasing multiplier as well. That does it for a Paragon board then, and actually setting up the build as a whole. So now let's just talk about how to play it. It is relatively simple. You just use Vortex to group your enemies up, especially after you cast Scourge to keep them from running away from you while feared. You keep Ravager at 100% uptime as best as you can. Then Armored Hide you want it with 100% uptime as well, which is best achieved through the Intricacy passive. For the most part, you want to just hold down the button that you have set to cast Touch of Death the whole time that you're playing this build. However, you do need to let go immediately before casting Armored Hide. Then you want to immediately cast the Hunter afterwards in order to get your free cast spawning on Armored Hide. You can then use it over the 5-second free duration, which will give you another free cast, and of course you can start holding down Touch of Death again the second you use your Jaguar ultimate. Then by the time your third Armored Hide runs out, the Hunter will be off cooldown again due to our key passive, which then lets you keep this loop up pretty indefinitely, and importantly lets you cast Armored Hide once every 3 seconds, which keeps the Unyielding hits bonus active for significant damage boost, even without using a Gorilla main skill, as it's the only way to really do that without doing that. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Your full guide to the Unyielding Touch of Death Spiritborn build, made around creating as many swarms as possible and popping them with little fragments of shrapnel imbued in them from the armor that we infuse into every hit with this aspect, causing the explosions to get even larger and even deadlier. I hope you've enjoyed this then, and I hope you enjoy using this build for yourself too if you try it out. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.